And let's see. Um, I think that we are all connected.
Yep. Says
Good.
we're live.
Welcome to TypeScript Tuesdays. TypeScript Tuesday brought to you by Virtual Coffee. Um, Virtual Coffee is a tech community geared at fostering a welcome space for folks at all levels of the journey to make space for meaningful contributions for growth and leadership at all levels. If you want to find out more, you can always check out virtualcoffee.io. My name is not Dan. I'm Kirk. I am one of the maintainers at Virtual Coffee. Um, and I am joined today by our favorite people in the community, Joe Caro, who will be taking over. Dan has the flu. He is not doing great, and we wish him the best of luck, and we hope that he feels better soon. But while he's out, we're going to do a bunch of shenanigans. We're going to have a big party. Um, I don't think Joe and I have a very specific energy, and I don't think it's throw a big party. I think it's like drink wine and make fun of things.
I don't know. Like, I didn't even know that there was some big old like flu going around because I just don't ever leave my house.
That's the
And it's
spirit.
paid off.
Aha. Um, Actually, I just found out there's somebody I know who they, they just got COVID for the first time, and I was like, oh, I didn't know people like you exist. You know,
I still
Joe
haven't gotten it.
Woods. What?
Yeah.
I feel like I feel like in a couple of years you're going to be able to like sell your blood for science. Like, what are the untainted like? And it's going to be like, how many of you are left? And all seven of you will be taken to a facility in like Los Alamos.
Hey, a revenue stream's a revenue stream.
Boom. Hey, everybody in chat. Hey, Nick. Hey, you don't know who Rec 990 is. Um, I don't know your cool handles. My handle is always like TK and then my last name because I'm very boring. Oh, it's Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome, welcome. Yeah. So, what are we doing today? Today is have another themed episode. Recently, the TypeScript official team announced the release of TypeScript 4.9. I mean, officially 4.9.4 is what we're up to for like stable release. There's a bunch of cool things in it, a bunch of things that are, I think, really good. There are also a couple things that might be a little confusing or mystifying for some folks. So we just wanted to kind of like go over it, just like, hey, what's happening with TypeScript? What's good, what's bad, what's relevant, what can we like safely like not think about? Because a ton of stuff came out, and like most of it is like you might never care. But there's some stuff that you probably should care about, and it can make your life easier. So we were gonna jump into it. Joe, have you had a chance to sort of like take a look at their fancy little release notes?
So yeah, I'm the type of person that as soon as like a release is like out, I'm like upgrade. So I just kind of force like the rest of my team on the bleeding edge with me.
I
Maybe.
Probably healthy. If there's no immediate downside, I'm a big fan of like, yeah, let's just have the latest thing,
Right.
right?
I mean, come on, it's from Microsoft, right? They've worked on bugs.
Microsoft has never released buggy software. Well, I mean, I have been on the other side, right? Like going from version, like 3.5 to 3.6 could be painful, but like going from version like 2.4 to 4.8 is probably like bad, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just I upgrade often because like I trust myself more to handle the micro version change and like the major change that I know is like incompatible and like break all my things. Um,
Yeah, I think one of the big things for me was like in my old job, like I probably spent way too much time on Windows 7, like when all the other newer versions out there. So I'm just like I vow to never use like outdated software again.
I mean, I know a lot of sysadmins who will tell you you will pry Windows 7 from their cold dead hands. Um, and it didn't help that like initial Windows 8 was
Yeah.
rough. You know,
And then
Microsoft doesn't do themselves any favors sometimes.
was Vista after that or before? No, Vista was before 7, right?
Yes. So famously, they're cursed. So every other major release is good. 98 was great. We don't speak of 2000 and ME. XP was great. Don't like Vista. 7 was great. Don't like 8. So 10
And we skipped
officially,
9.
yeah, they never. So, okay, weird aside, they're not the only ones who did that. A bunch of companies just never do a 9. The iPhone, I think, like famously, I can't remember if there was an iPhone 9. It was just straight to
No, no, because
X.
it went from yeah
Yeah.
from 8 to X.
I don't know why this happens, but a bunch of them are just like, no 9.
I mean, well,
Can't
they
wait.
didn't. I mean, back in the day, didn't like wasn't there like before it was called Mac OS? Wasn't there like a System 9? Like that was before like OS 10.
There was something, but it's just recently that's been a thing. Or I don't know if it was because like one company was like hitting their like 10 series and they're like, well, I'll do our 10 series. They can't
Right.
be the only ones on 10. We can have 10 too. But sir, what about 9? 9
We all
doesn't
get-
exist. We're 10 people now.
right. Double digits or bust.
You know, I'll see what happens when they get to like 13 and see who's like superstitious or not.
Yeah.
Uh, my favorite, I promise to be like the last aside, like my favorite, like Mitch Hedberg joke is like, I lived on a building with no 13th floor. But come on, 14th floor people. You know what floor you're really on. It's like, you can't lie to yourself. Okay, and with that completely unrelated note, let's just like dive in. Let's just dive into, I got a little playground opened up. Shout out to TypeScript Playground, which is great and just easily lets me convert between versions. So the the oh, is this? Can everyone see this? Okay, is this like screen size? Okay, I can blow it up if people need to.
I think maybe yeah. I think that should be good right there.
Awesome. Okay, so the big thing I think we wanted to talk about today was this new satisfies keyword that they have announced, and um, I was thinking before we sort of like dive into the examples, maybe if you want to take a crack at it, you could sort of tell me what you think it does, and then we'll sort of like go from there.
I, so I kind of like I skimmed through the notes about it like a couple weeks
Mhm.
ago, and I've tried to use it like in practice, and it yelled at me. But
That
from
that's
my understanding, like isn't it just basically isn't it like a way to tell TypeScript like yeah this will end up being in like to match this type like instead of actually like typecasting like doing like blah
yes,
blah blah as whatever.
yeah. No, it's the way I sort of resolve it in my head is like it is a constraint without a conversion. Um, it's your way of telling TypeScript, I need this to at least be this thing, but without replacing what it was before. Um, and for use cases, what we'll see when we dive in here, but it's I think I found like a natural pattern for using it, which is simply to not use it until it becomes like super obvious that you're going to need it. But let's sort of like look at the example they gave. So the first thing they sort of said was like, okay, we've got some object. In this case, we've got this like little palette thing. Um, this is untyped from our perspective, right? Like TypeScript is constantly working in the background. So TypeScript looks at it, says like, okay, it's got like a first field red, array of numbers, green's a string, blue is an array of numbers. Because red is like an array of numbers, we get to use the at operator, which if you try this and you get an error, at I think only exists on like ES 2022 or later. So that's something that we got for it. And then on green, we can do two uppercase because green's a string. So the thing like TypeScript will say like immediately there is a problem here, which is that like we spelt blue incorrectly, right? Or like, or in more general sense, like this field is misnamed. We've made an error. Later on, if we attempt to use this, this could probably cause a crash. It's like, oh, TypeScript to the rescue. We can make a type for the keys. We can say like, hey, this has to be a record with like colors for the field names, which is these things. Um, and then like the values here. So now like the old problem goes away. If we try and type the wrong field name, it's like, hey, you this is bad. I'm like, cool, that worked. But now down here we have a new problem, right? Like when we try and do that green dot to uppercase, TypeScript's like, you can't do that. This field could be a string or an array of numbers. Um, two uppercases only for like you haven't determined which one it is.
Right.
So we've hit this weird scenario where we added a type to sort of like be more concrete about the fields, but we've now lost information about the values of this specific piece of data. This was the thing. I've encountered this before. If you use sort of TypeScript enough, like you would have probably hit this scenario. I used a type to make something like add information about what a thing is, but I lost specificity on a specific value. So there's the solution for this before 4.9 is weird. Like you basically have to sort of like either do the logic to be like, yeah, this is actually a thing, like verified first, like get through the type of blah, 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 blah. Or add like make this type like even more specific, which might not necessarily be what you want, because you do want colors to be like any one of the matches, but it's just this value that I already know is this thing because I'm creating it. So this is where satisfies are coming. So first I need to like switch to 4.9.4 because otherwise it'll not recognize satisfies at all. And then if we add the satisfies keyword and I did everything correctly, this to uppercase should go away. At least the error should go away in a little bit. The compiler should be slow. Why is it slow?
Or
because
what?
I don't know.
Would you have?
Oh, sorry.
Would you have to do the satisfied after that?
No, I need to remove now this casting, right? There we go.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're no longer, right? We're no longer typing palette. We're not, like you said, we're no longer casting palette to the thing. We're just saying, hey, it fulfills the requirements here. And now, when you look at the type for palette, it's still what it was before. But like it works for this. So if we have some interface that like needs this like record color shape, this will go in and TypeScript won't complain. But here, like it still knows the actual types of these values, and we still get to use uppercase because like, yeah, we know that's a string. When we made it, it was a string. You should be able to see that. And this is really like what it's for. We have another example here. So similar situation.
Like it would still yell at us if we change like one of those array values to a string.
Well, yeah. So we still get, if this now breaks record, it's going to yell, right? And yeah, if we try to do something like this, it's going to yell because this is supposed to be an array of numbers. So you get the best of both worlds, I guess. You get the specificity of the thing, but you also get the constraints. Everybody wins. A couple of things I really like about it, mainly just I appreciate this word. Whenever something introduces new features, I'm gonna like, oh, is this gonna be a pain? Like for new people, do I have to like teach them a bunch of new stuff? And it's like, even if you're not exactly sure what's going on, satisfies like feels like a meaningful word. Like if I saw this like palette 2 satisfies this shape, I'm like, okay, I kind of get what's probably happening here. So kudos to them on not calling it something bad.
I mean, and it fits in with the general like TypeScript flow because like
yeah,
after a while, like I'm sitting here trying different things and I'm like, are you satisfied yet? And now it finally is.
TypeScript programming is just repeatedly screaming, "Are you satisfied yet?" over and over until the compiler like feels bad and like gives up. Oh, we've got more people in here. Hey, I yes, I did get a haircut. I did shave, and my face feels bald. Okay, so we have a second example here. It's really more of the same thing, but it's a similar situation where like sometimes you want to. So TypeScript is what we call like a structurally typed language. So if you say like if something, if especially if an object like satisfies, there's that word again, the shape of another object, TypeScript's like, oh, okay, they're the same. Like you can use this, it's fine. But sometimes we do want to like actually limit the fields that something can be. So here, we want to say like favorite colors can only the fields again can only be these colors. And then we want to be like, oh yeah, like this thing is obviously false. This is working as intended.
Mhm.
However, we hit a problem down here because we've set the type of this is colors and like unknown because like the constraint we're trying to make doesn't care about the values. We've now lost the fact that this is a boolean. So it's a similar situation. We've like made a type for some restriction, but we've lost information because of something else. In this case, like we've been using like fields and then values, but it could actually be the opposite, right? Like we could have like some type that says like everything has to be a number, and then like we lose field info for similar reasons. Um, yeah, so if we get satisfies in here and then we remove this type conversion, we don't want to convert the type of the value, we just want to say it satisfies something, right? Get back what we wanted. um, Green is a boolean, it knows that, that's great, but we still get like the complaint that this thing doesn't satisfy colors, and we take that out and then everything's happy and then we can kind of move on. Similar situation as the last time. So you know when do you use satisfies? I feel like you use it exactly when this happens. You write your types as normal, you do your castings as normal, and at a certain point, you're going to try and do something. You're going to notice, wait a minute, why doesn't it know what this type is? And it's like, oh, because I changed it to this. And it's like, oh, okay, that's the satisfies time. But I don't know if I would necessarily like preempt it until I got like a really good feel for.
Right.
So I'm gonna like wait for basically the compiler to yell at me about something, and when I'm like, oh no, you know what this is, like, no, I don't. Okay, satisfies, and then it should be fine.
Yeah,
Um,
and I guess it's because sometimes I'll get like it'll yell at me because of like a name, like I don't know, for some reason it just doesn't recognize that like
mhm,
this does actually like satisfy a named type or something.
mhm.
Actually, oh,
Yeah,
what it is it's like if I do something where like I think I've seen it where like if I make a an object where like the keys are like from a like a read only type, because like
yeah,
I'll like make an array of strings and then do it as const and say, all right, this is
mhm,
my keys right here. Like sometimes I'll get it like it'll yell at me for that
yeah,
because like it's like, well, this is not, like this doesn't equal this read only property.
yeah. And these situations just come up where like you have a value,
Mhm.
and it's like, I know this is the right shape, but I don't want you to like destroy what it is. I just want you to like know that it's the right shape. And satisfies will jump in there. So I think it's a good addition to the language. Like it does like solve a problem that people had before in sort of like an unobtrusive way. There's going to be a bunch of like conditional logic that people no longer need because like they can just say what it is, and mainly like it's logical, like it's saying a thing that is true, versus like casts or like the as keyword where you're kind of like cheating a little bit.
Mhm.
um, because if this isn't true, this will complain. If it can't actually convert the value to whatever you said, it'll still yet. So you still
Right.
get the type safety, you know? So
Yeah. Whereas
I'm
like
a fan.
if you do as, it's like, well, you're the boss.
Yeah. And sometimes the boss hasn't slept in like 46 hours and it's 3 a.m., you know, and we're doing like tequila code night again. Maybe I shouldn't be the boss, you know? There's no blood alcohol limit for git commits.
Not yet.
Um, Not yet. I'm sure. I'm sure there's some AI bot that's just like waiting to just freeze my machine, and that is called Skynet, folks. So pay attention. Cool. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it for satisfies. It's like it's an edge case that happens often enough that it's not an edge case. It's just like a case. So if you have a value that you want to use as part of another type, but still keep the specifics of that value, then satisfies is your friend. Like you said, situations where you're doing something like as const, so you're treating something as like a tuple, like, oh, these are these specific things that it is, but I still want it to be that other thing. It's great. Um, the next thing I want to talk about, so this is another feature that's coming in, um, is something. So I'm going to change this back to 4.8.4. It's something that I wouldn't even say is necessarily a, it's like sort of TypeScripty, but what we just dealt with was like TypeScript as like a compiler, as like a sort of like mathematical reasoning engine. This one is just sort of like TypeScript as a help you write better JavaScript because current JavaScript can be confusing thing, which is another feature of TypeScript that's like very important. It just helps you avoid like weird JavaScript things. So um, let's talk about our favorite value, nan. Love nan. Nan, for those who don't know, means not a number. A lot of the mathematical operations in JavaScript may return nan. Nan is a number. It is one of the things that can be returned from something that returns a number, even though it means literally and semantically not a number.
Is it like what you
Um,
get back if you like divide by zero?
yeah. Or if you try and like mess with infinity, or if you're, this happens very often, if you try and like read a number from some sort of input data like a CSV or a JSON and it's not, a
Mm.
lot of the functions that try and parse that will return nan if they can't figure it out.
Oh, like if I do like
Um,
parse int on like a not numbered string.
yes.
Okay.
I I personally hate it. Okay, I have a thing about this. Where like if something could return a thing that like isn't what I think it is, I prefer nullables. You
Mm.
know, so like I like a function like I would make a function called like I try to make functions that say something like try parse.
Right.
You know, where it's you get some string and that's a string, and like the return type is like number or like undefined. Well, I don't really use undefined much, like number or null, right? So when you use this, it's immediately obvious like the thing I am going to do could not work. Um, but a lot of the like native JavaScript parsing things don't do this. Um, and to change them would be like break 30 years of code. So they're never going to do this. So they're just the way that they are. So we have nan. It lives in our world and we can't avoid it. Um, and for the most part, like it's fine. You do your nan checks, but there's something like there's a real dangerous thing about nan that is completely, as far as I'm concerned, unintuitive, which is that like nan's not a number, so nan can never be equal, but nan is a number, so it supports the equality operator. What does that mean? If you try and compare nan with zero, that's obviously false because zero is not a number. Zero is a number. If you try and compare nan with nan, that is also false because nan is not a number. and is thus uncomparable to other numbers, including nan. That's weird.
So how the hell are you supposed to check for nan?
You're supposed to check for nan using a special function in the number module called
Oh, is nan.
isNan. No one knows about this until you try and use nan inequalities and it breaks. Nan will always be false when compared to any other number, including nan. So, what they did in version 4.9 was they just said, what if we just made this wrong? So, we're going to switch and we're going to see that that is now, all of those things are now wrong. Don't do this. It's wrong. Like, because it really does not make sense to use, like, this is not a sensible statement
Right.
because this is not equalable.
Right.
And
Like
now it will tell you. Yeah.
it's like just save yourself the key presses and just type in false.
Yeah. Or like, so now it'll literally tell you this condition is always false. Did you mean number.isNan? This is a nonsense statement. It doesn't do what you want. You can't use it for logical operations in your code because it only ever returns one value forever. So they just threw that in, right? And like, that's great. It's not really, it's not a type thing, you know. It's
No.
just a compiler going, that doesn't make sense. JavaScript will let you do it. It's valid JavaScript, but like in real life, it doesn't make sense. So don't do it.
I wonder if this is like one of those things that would kind of like bubble down to JavaScript if you were using VS Code. It's like
Oh,
because even if you're not specifically like using TypeScript, like don't some things kind of like from the TypeScript compiler or whatever bubble down? Like I guess especially if you have like a JS config in your project.
I suspect that at some point in like the official ECMAScript standard, this is going to get dealt with, you know?
Hmm.
As of right now, like it's still valid JS. It'll just do it. Um, so at this point, the only way to like know that this is a problem is to use TypeScript or some other, you know, like it could be that something like ESLint might have like this condition in
Right. Yeah.
it. But as of right now, it's perfectly valid JavaScript. Um, not a number is a number, um,
Except
which
for when
means
it's
you can
not.
use, except for when it's not. And to be fair, I always tell people this, like, this is not a JavaScript, like, JavaScript did what it was supposed to. It's IEEE standard to have a nan, and this is the official behavior of nans. This is how nans are supposed to work. Nan is just a weird concept. And a lot of languages just don't implement nan because it just makes life easier to say everything that thinks it's a number works like a number. And we don't have this weird number called not a number that isn't a number but is a number.
Right. Like
Is a number is a number.
if this function does not work, then yeah, like just return undefined or something because I can't
Right.
define it because it's not a number.
Yeah, I can't use it for number things because it's not a number. I can't multiply it. I can't do anything because it's not a number, but it is a
What is 7 times q?
number. Exactly. That's kind of worse, right? Like JavaScript will give you an answer for 7 times q. It won't give you an answer for 7 times not a number. It'll just be not a number. But the not a number that you got from multiplying 7 times q is not equal to the not a number that you multiply by 7. You know, like people are like, oh, it's like zero. It's not like zero. Zero's great. Love zero. Not a number. Terrible. So now TypeScript will just tell you whenever you try and use not a number like a number, because there's very often times where like you can do this by accident. It's not even as explicit as this, you know, like you're doing some operation and you just don't know, then you might have some nans in there or something like that.
Well, I
Um,
guess like the biggest thing would be like if you're parsing in like URL query options, and
mm,
like especially if you're doing something with like a pick and a take with like pagination and stuff, because it's going to deliver those numbers as a string.
yeah,
So if someone decides to like pass in like a word instead of a string number, then yeah, then you're going to get NAND.
man. Yeah, it's just I don't know. There's Nan for me, it feels very similar to null in that like it was made and we thought it was a good idea at the time, and it's not a bad idea all the time, but it's very much just more trouble than it's worth. I never like if I have a function that returns like a number type, I never return man. If I can't do the operation, you get back a null, and you have to explicitly handle that. But most importantly, the type system will tell you what do you do when this doesn't work, and
Yep.
that just doesn't work with man. That's why it bothers me a lot.
Right. Because
Um,
if you're returning NAND, it's still going to give you a return type as a number.
yeah,
It's so
it,
it's not gonna force you to handle a NAND. Like whereas if you type it as number or null, it's gonna be like, well, what if this is null? What are you doing now?
right. Um, so that's just a thing, and that's like that's one of those cases where we talk about this a lot of like programming languages and type systems and features. Just because something has 20, 25 features, it doesn't mean you should use all 25 features, or like it doesn't mean like they're all good all the time. It's like a tool shed. It's like I don't need to use this. Like this is where I realize I don't know anything about tools, but like you have some like fancy belt sander or whatever. You're like, oh, I'm gonna belt sand everything. Don't
Yeah,
just
just
use
use a
man.
nail file.
Yeah, you know. And Nan is just one of those things that I classify Nan in the same place I use like the old like date library, and just like there's a bunch of behaviors that absolutely made sense when this was made
Mhm.
that make a lot less sense most of the time now. But yeah, TypeScript's got your back on that. That feels really good. I'm happy this is here. I always want to know when I'm doing this. Tell me, you know, this is not equal to nan is always true. Equal to nan is always false, even if it's nan. It's not comparable. Okay. Uh, Next thing I wanted to talk about, next thing on the sort of like 4.9 breakdown, and I should post, I will, let's see if I can grab the link for everyone to the official announcement. A lot of these examples I just were taking from the official announcement. I highly recommend everyone to give them a read through. I think the language is pretty accessible. I think the team's done a good job of just like, this is what we're up to without using some of the jargon that you see in like GitHub PRs where they get very,
Yeah.
so that's good. Um, this next one, just another quality of life one. So I'm going to change back to 4.8.4. Um, This is going to yell because this doesn't exist in 4.8.4. This is the new accessor keyword. What does accessor do? It does a bunch of stuff under the hood. Um, and what we can do is we can look, actually, okay, I'm going to change back to 8.4 for a second. And we're going to take a peek like this JS side, which I love. So here on the JS side, this class just becomes like it's like a one-for-one translation because classes exist in JavaScript, even though people don't use them as much, right? It's a class, a constructor, and then we've got like a single method here. Cool, no problem. Um, if we change to 4.9, though, we're going to see something a little more interesting. Here you notice like, oh, we've got a lot more going on in this class. So what accessor does is it's some syntactic sugar, whatever you pass in. So accessor name, it's going to automatically make getters and setters based on that variable name. In this case, it's name, and it's going to make a private, hidden, actual value under the hood. So yeah, basically, you add this one keyword, you get getters and setters for your value for free.
So that
Uh,
the hash is actually like that's like proper private because like when I
mhm.
was first kind of learning about getters and setters, they're just like just prefix it with a with an underscore.
Yeah,
That just tells people not to use it.
yeah, it's not actually, yeah. So that's it's borrowed. I don't know if Python was the first language to do this, but in Python, similar to JavaScript, there's no true private fields. So you use an underscore when I tell people like don't touch this, and you use like a double underscore is like reserved for some specific
Really,
field.
don't touch this.
Yeah. Well, I'm not even sure if you're allowed to define your own double underscore stuff. It's supposed to be like literally like language defined methods.
Yeah,
But
like
yeah, generally that's the pattern.
because I think like the most common double underscore thing I'll use is like dir name.
Yeah, name, main. There's like a few others. So yeah, JavaScript used to do this too. With the more recent ECMAScript versions, they added this. You can add the little number sign, and it's like a true private field. So like it should not, you should not be able to see this. Let's see if we can do this. If we do like, hey, const y is equal to new person Bobby, why not? We get name and sing as like it looks all the same, but like in reality, under the hood, when this becomes JS, there's going to be this sort of like real variable name that is unavailable to anything else. And this has a couple advantages. We won't really sort of like get into it, but like if we ever subclassed person, this ensures that we can't shadow the true variable name.
Mhm.
Like we can mess with these getters and setters or do whatever, but like the actual value underneath is going to remain unchanged. There's like a couple advantages here. Like when we extend and like modify this class, it makes sure like the shape underneath is like stays consistent. But yeah, it's a convenient thing. I can see myself using this a lot. It just makes life easier. And it's like taking advantage of like new ECMAScript like JS features, which is good. So, you know,
I
instead of
just
you
happen
having to
to
do
like,
all this.
yeah, I
Yeah.
just avoid classes at all cost.
One day we should probably do like a crash course in classes. I do think that when I started programming like for realsies with Python. And for a long time, I only wrote functions. I didn't touch classes. Then I learned about them. And then I wrote everything as classes. The classes are great. OOP is great. Visitor patterns, sign me up. Uh, then I got into functional programming where there's no classes. And I was like, classes suck. I hate classes. Ooh, OOP. Now I'm just like, there's super good reasons for them. And maybe one day we'll do like a what are classes good for? When should you use them? Um, and my sort of TLDR version is classes are great as like a small named controlled interface with a tiny piece of like state that needs to be managed. To me, that's when classes work best. I'm giving a name to like some state and ways of interacting with that state in a way that's like super controlled and reasonable. And there's a lot of use cases for that. Very often in the JS ecosystem, we partition things using files, right? We use files and we use modules, files and modules, and usually like we just make the file the module. Um, and then it leads to that thing, which I don't know, people have mixed feelings about. I certainly have feelings about it. Where like you end up with like a ton of files. There's just so many files in like every single JS project. And sometimes I see a file and I'm like, this file could have just been class. just like one little class that like does a thing and like does it properly. We
But
can
when you
just
still put that class in the file, though.
yeah, but like instead of making a new file just for the class, I just kept it in another file, you know. So I might like have one file with a few little helper classes rather than like six files with just like functions in them. Um, it is true that I mean, like, this is like the main thing I learned. There's nothing you can do with a class that you probably couldn't have just done with a module and functions and variables. Um, but sometimes the like, I don't know, you can call it the ergonomic thing or the like semantically viable thing or the more readable thing or the more maintainable thing could have just been a small class. And yeah, maybe we'll think about that for like maybe next time.
Yeah, I guess
Although it's not really a TS thing.
I was like, it's like I guess like a good use case, because you were saying also like manages some state. Like if you were kind of like editing a database document, or a record, so like you could pull it down, have that be the new class, but because you could also define methods on there of like save or you know undo or
Yeah. So
meow.
um, very often interfaces like APIs and interfaces are modeled as classes because like it's a very, I don't know, there's something very like logical about saying, oh, I want a new whatever this is. Like databases are a great example, right? I want a new database connection, and that's a class, right? Like it's an instance that persists. There's data in it that you can call. There's methods on the instance that you can call. And when the instance goes away, like you can no longer do that, right? Like it's like an entity throughout the lifetime of your code. Like it needs to live. It's got some state in it. So that's like usually done as a class. You could always do it as functions, but like the mechanics of those, it all becomes the same thing at the end, but like the expressiveness changes. So
Mhm.
APIs are frequently done as classes. Um, Anytime like you have an API that's like a new thing or like sometimes it's like in the form of a function, but what the function returns is like a class instance with a bunch of other things on it. And then you end up using like accessors, right? So instead of just functions out in the open, you can say like thing dot and then thing that works with that instance. So I don't hate classes. I've definitely seen classes gone overboard. I don't think I'll ever be a fan of the for like everything as a class style of like Java
Mhm.
or even like old school like C#. Um, but there are cases where it's super useful. Recently, what was it? I had to do some like WebSocket stuff, and I was working with React, and I was just like in this weird place where like that thing where I now found out like this is intentional. Like React will like use effect and like trigger multiple times or
Oh yeah.
like you don't really have control of rendering, right? Yeah. So I wanted a way to be like, okay, when this thing makes a connection, if there's already a connection, don't try and make another connection. And the
Right.
answer, there's a bunch of answers. The answer ended up being like making a tiny little class that just like kept track of like, are we still connected? If we are, just give them back the old connection. So it didn't matter how many times like React like ping the thing, the class was handling. No, it's okay. Just take back the old one. And that was great. So all that to say, there are use cases for classes. Um, they don't have to be scary. One of the things about classes is like before classes existed in JS, we had that whole like prototype structure. And I do think it was a lot more nuanced and it was a lot easier to get things on. It was a lot easier to like give yourself problems. Um, so I with the caveat that when I say classes in JS, I'm very much talking about like post like ES5, like ES6 style classes, not the old prototype system. Under the hood, these do just become the old prototype system, but like that is now an implementation detail of JS, not something you, the developer, have to deal with. This class structure is a lot more like intuitive and logical.
Yeah, it's a lot cleaner than like because especially coming from another language, like you're pretty much going to understand like the concept of a class. But if you're sitting there like, what are you doing? Prototypes? What? No.
Yeah, and the prototype model just, like you said, it did not behave the way other languages thought about classes. And so, you know, um, it just took a lot of working. And to be honest with you, never, I've never done like prototype stuff in real life because I got into JS sort of like after classes came in. I'm like, oh, these are great. I'm just going to use these instead. I have to maybe if I hit a legacy code base, but I know a lot of people like it's on their list of JS things to learn, right? Like I should learn about prototypes. I'm like, you should like take a peek at it, but would I prioritize mastering them? Not necessarily, or at least not before just like regular classes. But yeah, with this new feature, you can get a class, get a getter, and a setter just all at once. And I suppose for anyone in the chat who like might not know what getters and setters are, a class has like two main features: attributes, which are sort of like the stateful values in the class to change, and then methods, which are just functions that work with like those attributes. Getters and setters are just methods which have access to some of like an internal attribute, but to the outside of the class, they look like static values. So this looks like we're getting an attribute, we're just getting like a value in the class. What it actually is this get name, this method that is pulling the value from internally. The nice thing about getters and setters is that like to the people consuming your API, they just think they're accessing static things. You can do things under the hood. You can do formatting. You can do transformations. So it lets you separate like how you want to keep the data from like how you want to like present it to someone else, which makes a lot of sense. It's like when your parents like want you to send them a picture, and so like you find the part of your house that's like cleanest, and then you use that as your background to send the picture to your parents. This isn't, I'm not going to show you my actual house. This is the nice representation of my house that lets you think like I'm a functional adult. That's what getters and setters do. The setter works in reverse, right? Like people can pass you. So earlier on, Joe, we were talking about like you were doing some data cleanup because users entered lots of different values into
Whatever
a
they felt like.
yes. you know Say you wanted to keep their ability to send in whatever they felt like because they're like, I wanted to be able to express myself, but you wanted to make sure the stuff that actually hits the database isn't garbage. That's where setters come in, right? Setters like can do a bunch of operations on the value coming in before it becomes the final data type. So
Now, do setters like do they work only kind of like when you're defining like the new class? Like so like does the setter just work on like on Bobby, or is that still just like on the constructor?
um,
So like like if you know we were doing we were taking in like two values. We were doing first name and then last name. Like would the constructor be the one that's kind of like assigning those to the two different variables, or like would that be like the setter?
that's a good question. Okay, so let's see. If we did something like this, um, this is going to complain. Like TypeScript's doing a ton of stuff though. Like it's going to complain like by saying this,
Mm-hmm.
we are saying that like we're
Well,
making some instance value and like it has to be given a value at construction time. But let's say we just like gave it a value from the beginning. So let's do. Right. So what have we done here? We have said this class has an attribute called last name. It starts with a value of fields. because it has an initial value, we're no longer required to like pass it in at construction time, right? It'll be there when the instance is made. But we're still getting that same benefit of like the getter and the setter. The getter and the setter just have to do with like attributes on the class. They don't really care about what happens in the constructor. Inside the class, you can do whatever you want.
Okay.
They're for like interfacing outside.
Well, yeah, and I see that it actually did kind of like compile down to add that into the constructor using the
Mhm.
private.
Yeah. So like this, TypeScript understands how to like translate all of this into what you want. So when
Now,
you do this, like this, yeah, this is shorthand for at construction time, like grab the default value and stick it in
so
there.
if you are where you're doing the new person, if you hover over person like for like the like it's still only accepting just that one
Yeah.
whatever's in the constructor.
Hmm. Um, I do believe. So I think what we do get to do here, though, if I say this, um, then it's going to be like, I think there is a syntax to say, there should be a syntax to say like, this is an optional value.
Well, what if you just do like the question mark after?
Will it still work? Is it still happy?
It's still
Great.
having
Last
they
name, and
both.
it's still doing the assignment. Nice. Um, Now I remember, can't remember this. There's a lot of stuff where it's like, did this actually make it in, or was this just a proposal? Okay, so now this complaint. Hmm.
Oh, I guess because it's not created. I don't know.
TS. I'm gonna do a search here. Class constructor shorthand. Um, so okay, so there's what I was thinking of is slightly separate.
Okay.
So we're gonna like move this away for a second. So we're gonna do this. We're gonna use the private keyword. I think this is what we want.
Oh yeah.
Maybe not private, maybe public. There we go. So if we do this, so this is syntactic shorthand for, the things you get in here automatically make them attributes. So
Like
you
yeah,
can just
like
define
just
it.
let
Yeah.
them flow down.
What I don't know, and what we can find out, is if you can mix these. No, it doesn't seem to like that.
No,
But
well, what if you put it back to public and then uncomment the accessor above?
oh, yeah, that could be. No, it's Matt.
Well, it's still. Oh, is it? Oh, it is Matt.
Private name is no. Initializer, not that. Yeah, I feel like both of these, like they're fighting with each other, right? Because like this is defining an attribute and this is defining an attribute. But we should do more research here. Maybe there's just like a way to say this that we're missing. Um, could be. I really want this to work. I feel like it should be able to work, but I don't know how. But yeah, but this is.
Or what if you made name optional? Like
Hmm, something like that.
no, still don't like it.
What if I learned to spell? That's never happening. Well, okay, if we make name optional, we're going to have to give it a.
Well, then I guess make it required again.
Like we can do all this, but like it's no longer. It just thinks this is something else. Um, yeah, I don't know. Um, I am not sure. So yeah, I don't know if there's a way to mix the two. I would like there to be a way to do that because it feels like that would be a cool thing and in line with like how people might want to use this feature. It's like, oh, this is a shorthand and this is a shorthand. Just give me two shorthands. Um,
I'm just curious, what would happen if we just commented out like the entire constructor, like line 70 and 71?
let's find out. Um,
Nothing.
it would be well, okay. So we would
Oh,
take this away. Yeah, it still works, right? Like you just like when this class is initiated, it doesn't take any input values, and it's all going to be based on like what's in here, which could be useful if you have a class where you want you want it to start the same way every time, but throughout its life cycle, you are going to be modifying those initial values. But if you want them to have the same defaults, then it is perfectly valid to be like,
like it could
yeah,
be useful if you're like if you're using the class to like start a client instance and you're
yes,
using that to like pull in like environment variables.
yeah, it always starts the same way, and then
Mm.
throughout usage it changes. Under the hood, like, see, like it'll still make a constructor.
Right.
This constructor just like won't have anything in it. And like, let's say we removed these entirely. Well, like this would obviously complain. Um, and this would complain. But like, this is technically still fine. We've
Mm.
just like defined an instance that only has methods on it, and it's I don't know if you've heard the words in relation to classes like static methods versus instance methods.
I think I've heard static before.
So static methods on a class just mean like methods that don't require an instance of the class to work. So a lot of times you will see something that seems to be both a value, but something you can call like without initialization, and it just has things on it, like we can do new number,
Okay. Oh, so yeah, so like
right? But we
yeah,
can
like
also do like number dot.
okay. Yeah, so like that's kind of like a lot of like the base stuff that's in JavaScript, like like object
Mhm.
array, map, set, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So like it's
The
it's
prototypes.
right. It's like an object that initializes, but there's a bunch of like methods and values on it that don't require an instance to access. So these are called like static methods and static attributes. So Sing here is not currently static. Um, right? Like the way we set it up. So let's see.
Mhm.
There you go. Right.
Oh, okay.
So static is just like the class is ultimately like just like a namespace, right? It's just like a namespace for stuff.
Yeah.
Instance values are like stateful stuff. But you can also put other stuff on there if it relates to the class, but doesn't need the class to work. Like if there is a value that's like this is relevant to persons and only to persons, you don't need a person to do it. You can do that.
Mhm.
Um, I have a big theory and argument in my head, though, which is getting back to like when our class is relevant. If you have a class that only has static methods, then that doesn't need to be a class, right? Then
Right.
that should just be a module because you're not using the class parts. Classes are namespaces for data that changes. That's what the instance is. It's this little piece of state that you can pass around and you can talk to in a way that you've controlled because the class is encapsulated. So if you have a class and nothing requires that little state encapsulation, don't make it a class. Just
Right.
use a function. All in all true. But yeah, but sometimes this is relevant too. So it's perfectly okay to define a class without a constructor. You can even define a class without any methods or attributes. Um, but then it's like, for why? Um, yeah, I don't know. That's now that I say it out loud, maybe they're a little more precarious than I thought. I suppose people say like these aren't things you normally have to deal with functions, but JavaScript functions are just objects, so you can attach like methods on functions and attributes on functions. Like you could treat them very similar to classes.
Right.
Should you? No.
Right, because you could also just have like a standard like object where like a bunch of keys are functions.
Yes. You know, so under the hood for JS, the line between all these things like blurs uh, quite a bit. It's all objects underneath. But at the top level where we want to stay, you should use classes like classes and you should use functions like functions. I never use the this keyword with functions because that is just opening up a whole world of confusion.
I
Um,
I just got it in my mind where like I don't even like using like the function keyword. I'm like arrow functions for everything.
um, I like arrow functions mainly just because like I prefer the syntax. I mean, there is
Yeah.
there is a there is a difference, and yeah, like this is not
I
defined
just
by
like the
arrow
way that they
functions.
read and like the fact that like if I'm doing something that's dead simple, I could I could still get it done in like one line. Don't have to
Yeah,
bother with the return keyword sometime.
I like the expressiveness of read. I like being able to say like const a equals thing equals b, and not have
Yeah.
to not dig into. Um, yeah, but so back to like patterns. I feel like this whole conversation has been about like good patterns. It's like if you're writing a class and you're not using this dot at any point, then you probably don't need this class. Um, if you're writing a function and you are using like this dot at some point, you probably should use a class. Don't use this for functions. Use this for classes. The class
Yeah.
of no this is just functions. A function for this is a class. Um, and even going back to like, it's like, don't use nan like this. It doesn't work. There's no big message there. This just doesn't work. And even though you can say it, you shouldn't. It's bad. And TypeScript will now tell you, don't do this. It's bad. This is a logical error because this is not a logical statement. Syntactically valid, not logical. Um, and now I guess like we have satisfies, which does a very specific bit of logic, which is to say this thing can be a thing, but it is not that thing. You know, it's a bit like a doggy door situation. Can the cat go through the doggy door? Yeah, because it's the right size.
Right.
Is the cat a dog? No,
No.
it is a cat.
Will a cat still eat dog food? Probably.
Should a cat still eat dog food? Depending on what veterinarians say, for
Yeah.
about 3 or 4 weeks is fine, but you really should get them their own cat food. The blends are different.
It's a protein thing.
It's a protein thing. Yeah, that's. uh, Sometimes we do this really well, and it just feels like we're on a TV show. But yeah, that's the main. Oh, no, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about with the latest release, but there's no code involved. The new TypeScript is just faster.
Mm.
They've made some general improvements to how the TypeScript compiler thinks. It makes it a lot faster. That article that I shared does a better job of explaining exactly how that works. But it's so when we think of like TypeScript watching our files, it's like, what did that mean? Before that meant something called polling. And all polling means was that, let's say you have a project and you say you have your tsconfig, and your tsconfig says, these are the files that matter to this project. TypeScript would just periodically check. each file that fell under that purview to see if something happened and run the compiler on it. Just check it, run the compiler on it, cool, move on. Check it, and it did that for everything. Um, so during like the cycle of your system, this was just happening all the time. And if you have a small to medium TypeScript project, this is perfectly fine. It's not that many files. However, as the size of your project grows and as you have more and more, really the number of files grows, this becomes a big problem. Or there's like a more subtle issue. Sometimes people think like, oh, well, my project's super small, but they don't think about their node modules. If you have a ton of TS node modules, that also can like get huge. Um, and you'd see like noticeable performance drops. I worked at a company where we're like, we hit this, we hit the hard limit on like TypeScript syncing, and it would just slow to a crawl. Um, so they've changed it. Now TypeScript no longer uses like polling. Now TypeScript uses file system events. So what the compiler now does is you say, hey, these are the files I want you to watch. It basically attaches like a callback to every single one of those files. It's like, if this file changes, let me know, right? So for files that almost never change, like node modules, like these things, it's going to ignore them until it needs to, which is great. Which is just like for big projects, it's going to be a huge perf boost.
So with the like in the TS config, like whenever you're doing like that includes glob.
Mhm.
If you don't like include like the file extension, like specifically call them out, will TypeScript literally try and like check like every file, like a text file or a JSON file or like an SVG or something?
I'm not sure. I want to say no, that it would default
Like it's going to
to.
default to like like TS, MTS, JS, CJS, MJS,
Yeah.
X, and all that stuff.
Um, or does it just like not check anything at all because you haven't defined a TS conflude?
Oh no, it'll check it. It'll check because I just do like the star star slash star.
Huh. I don't know. I'd be hard pressed to think it's gonna just like look at everything because that seems very dangerous. Um, hmm. Okay, if a glop pattern doesn't include a file session, then only files with supported extensions are included. TS, TSX, D.TS by default, and JS and JSX if allows JS is set to true. Okay,
Okay,
that seems
all right.
reasonable. So your TypeScript React and your TypeScript files and your like type definer files for
Mhm.
sure, and then maybe some JS if you tell it I want that too. But otherwise, no, that feels right.
Okay, yeah, no, that's nice to know.
Yes.
Otherwise, I got a lot of TS configs to edit.
Yeah, no, so that feels good. Um, yeah, so that's a big thing that's happening. For those of you who have ever like felt slow TypeScript, you should see some improvements. If you've never felt it be slow, then you're fine. Nothing has changed for you, and you will just continue to see it be okay in the future. There's a couple other small changes that have happened. There used to be this thing where like TypeScript combine the behavior of like removing unused imports and sorting imports,
Mhm.
which was a problem because like sometimes you just wanted to remove and not sort, or just sort and not remove. They've
Right.
like made those things separate now. I don't know how many people this was a problem for, but it was enough of a problem that they fixed it.
I mean,
Um,
it's weird because like there are some instances where I'd be like, yeah, go ahead and remove those, but then there's other ones where I'm just like, no, 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 no. I'm just saving the file for right now. I'm going to use that in a minute. Just
yeah,
wanted to import it while I still remembered it.
yeah. There's a couple other perf improvements which has to do with like how it looks for like children nodes, like children elements, which helps for type generics. We won't get into that because I don't even really understand how that works right now. Um, there's some more improvements for its type resolution for things like promises, which could be a breaking change for some people. If you were like relying on something being promise any, it is now could be something more specific. So that's something to look out for. But going back to what we said about like updates, that's the type of thing where like I do want to just like bite the bullet and see what's going wrong now.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Because like
but it should
yeah,
also be something to where like, if you upgrade it, like hopefully TypeScript is also like smart enough to know like all the shit that it broke.
yeah,
So
you know, like
you're just gonna get like a bunch of red lines.
mhm.
There's your to do list.
Exactly, right? Like it's if you upgrade and like there are more red lines, it's like, well, that's good.
Yeah,
It means it's working and like it's become like more specific about something. Then like I get to make the decision about what I do about this.
and hopefully they get a
Um,
little quick fix available.
yeah, so that should be fine. And there's already like a bunch of like notes and patches for this release. So 5.0 should be happening
Is it March?
maybe earlier.
Really?
Um,
Because I saw like they were gonna go for like beta in like January or something like that.
yes. January 24th is the scheduled 5.0 beta release. February 28th for like the RC release, and then yeah, March 14th for the final release for 5.0, which is interesting. Which feels soon, but I guess it's not soon.
It'll be here like sooner than we realize it.
Yeah, and it seems like they're doing some like big performance improvements again, some more like editor productivity and like faster like switch things. Like the idea, I guess, if you have a TypeScript union type, then the code completion can like understand, oh, you want to switch on this type. Like I know exactly what you want to switch on, which could be cool.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, just like it seems to be a lot of it's like getting smarter with like ECMAScript ideas and like TypeScript using those ECMAScript ideas. So that's really cool. Declaration files for non-JavaScript files is really cool. Um, allowing like there's a bunch of cool stuff, but we'll talk about it like when we
Right.
get there. For
We
now,
don't want to use up
12.1.
that material yet.
I know, gotta save it in my pocket. Um, but yeah, good stuff all around. I think the language is growing, but not in a way that feels unreasonable. And a lot of it is just like, oh, people have been asking for this thing for a while. We found a good way to do it that doesn't like piss off the other people who weren't asking for it.
Yeah.
Now it's in and it's faster. Great.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like TypeScript just kind of makes my JavaScript life easier
Yes.
because it like I was like I don't know. I was probably like I don't know, maybe like 6 or 8 weeks into like learning JavaScript, and I was like, every time I used to see like TypeScript from like examples, I was like, no, all this types is too much information, and then I just kind of like sat down one day and I was like, oh, let's give this a try, and now I can't even like bring myself to like name a file .js
Yeah.
for anything.
It's like before you were like, I know all these words. I'm so good at the words. I don't want to use a spell checker. You start using spell checker, and I was like, want me to type out a spell checker? Why? Why'd I spell this myself?
Oh, so that's how you spell receive.
I've spelled diamond incorrectly my entire life, and I'm not about to change. It's not diamond. Why is the I there? Um, on that note, do you have any final words for this stream before we head off?
No, I think ending on your creative spelling of diamond.
I'm not wrong. But yeah, with that, shout out to everybody who came. all the folks in chat and all the folks might be watching this later. Again, TypeScript Tuesdays, brought to you by Virtual Coffee. Check out vc.io for more info about us. And stay safe. May all your TypeScript squigglies be resolvable. Have a great day, everybody.
No music.
No music. Just
It's just gonna be a
go
hard
play some
stop.
Phil Collins. Yeah.
I wanted to play like a bit of Rolling Stones, but I was like, oh, we'll get copyright slammed.